Welcome to Multifamily Grit, where we bring in the experts to share their stories and pros and cons and celebrations and struggles of one of the most important industries of the U.S., multifamily property management. I'm joined today by Jason Miller, Director of Business and Technology Consulting at Dean Dorton, a professional services firm that helps clients redefine success through innovation and data-driven strategies by focusing on technology and accounting solutions. Jason has a BS in industrial technology management, which led him to managing engineering teams at a publicly traded international software company, and ultimately joining Dean Dorton, where he oversees a wide variety of projects for clients and serves as a virtual CIO for many organizations. In this capacity, he's been helping companies grow through defined tech and accounting strategies for over 23 years and has jumped into the multifamily industry with both feet over the past 5 years as Fortress's preferred partner. Today, we'll explore how Jason works with his customers to help them achieve success and what insights he's uncovered as he's been digging in behind the scenes with multifamily companies. And before we get started, we are sponsored today by the only core property management operating system built with an emphasis for affordable owners and operators. Fortress revolutionizes affordable management by reducing lead-to-lease time by 30% for affordable units to help save you time, generate cash flow, and watch your team succeed. And don't forget, if you like what you hear today, please like, subscribe, and share with someone you think would enjoy this episode. So, Jason, thank you so much for being here with me today.
Thanks for having me, Kerri. It's my pleasure.
Thanks. Well, before we dig in, would you mind sharing with our listeners how you got your start in the industry? And I think maybe even starting a little bit bigger picture with the industry of tech, how you got your start in tech, and then how you came to be so involved in multifamily.
Yeah, thank you. So I'll try to keep this simple, although it was not a simple process of how I landed in technology. It actually is a combination of right place, right time, and a bit of curiosity and desire to problem solve that made me kind of explore some things that otherwise that most people would have said no to before they even knew what was going on. But I started with technology actually in college. I went to a small liberal arts college called Berea College, and every student there has to work
I love
the whole
that.
time they're there. And that's one of the reasons that I ended up having to go there. My dad heard it's free and we're going to make him work. And so that was one of those right place, right time, or maybe at the time I thought wrong place, wrong time. Um, but I ended up there, and I was fortunate enough to be placed in the computer center as my labor assignment, which was fantastic. And so that drove a lot of my career more so than my actual degree. But I do credit my degree with a push to learn a little bit about a lot of different things. So that kind of created my curiosity and in learning about new industries and new tools in it. So I started at the computer center there, and then I became a software developer, which I did not want to do. Like, as I was going through the interview process after college, or during college toward the end, I absolutely did not want to do software development. I took one programming class in college and I hated it. I
Mm.
was more on the networking and the IT kind of hardware side of things. And through a series of things, ended up in kind of pre-dot-com bubble burst. Software development was a big demand. So I ended up looking in one of those doors and became a developer for about 3 years. And did pretty well. And as you mentioned, it was an international software company.
Yeah.
A lot of big software, kind of in the old school days, much different than what we deal with today. And then from there, ended up at Dean Dorton and have been here for almost 24 years now, which seems unreal looking back on it.
Yeah.
But at the time, it was a small accounting firm that had this little tiny software technology practice that sold and implemented and supported Great Plains accounting software.
Yeah.
And they were looking to broaden it to do more than just the accounting software. And so they recruited me to come help with that initiative. So that's how I landed where I am. And then from there, it's been a lot of fun helping clients leverage technology to grow and improve their businesses over that 23-year period.
Yeah, I love that. And I have a question about something you said. So you said that 23 years ago when you were at that international software company, the software that you were dealing with then was very different from the software today. How so?
Well, it was big mainframe type systems, client server based solutions, Oracle databases. It was heavily modified for each client, which
Mm,
was millions and millions of dollars of modifications,
yeah.
which was a support nightmare.
Yeah.
Part of my role there was to support the core system and then all these multiple different versions that the sales team kept selling these other clients that had to be supported every time an update was made in the core. It had to get made in all these different versions. And
Yeah.
the other component that I look back, and it's funny because not just that software, but a number of different industries that I've worked with clients at Dean Dorton have been a challenge because you had an operational system with accounting built into it. And
Mm,
that creates its own challenges in that the software's primary function is usually not accounting, and so all of the resources go into that functionality, and the accounting's kind of an afterthought. And so the accounting department kind of really gets the short end of the stick. And it's been
yeah.
interesting as I've gone through the early parts of my career at Dean Dorton. You go into a company historically and look at what software they used. I generally could tell you whether or not the CFO or the operations lead was more influential at the time they made the decision, because a lot of software is either really good at accounting and not so good at their operational side, or really good at operations and not so good at accounting. So it's a little different than what we deal with today, and why I like kind of the relationship we've got with our solutions.
Yeah. Oh, that's so interesting. It's interesting to hear you talk about that, the fact that the old school software tended to be highly customized by customer. I still think about that in terms of software we see today, whether that's a competitor to Fortress like Yardi or like Salesforce, where customers will go in and highly customize the solution. And then they've almost painted themselves into a corner where it's really hard to continue to evolve with the releases of the software, and or to your point, like deal with support issues, because customers, once they've highly customized their solution, the support team doesn't know how to support it anymore. So it's interesting, like, balancing that with the fact that companies think that they need something that's highly customized.
And we try to talk to clients as we look at different softwares about the differences between configurable versus customizable,
Mhm.
and whether or not
Mm.
those changes would paint you into a corner or not. And even I kind of mentioned, some of my earlier software days was Great Plains, and there were a number of different third party solutions that worked with Great Plains, but it was an upgrade nightmare for the team, because you had to check compatibilities of which version of Great Plains were you on, was it
Yeah.
compatible or not with the particular third party solution. And so everybody kind of cringed when you heard we were going to use two or three different softwares. And as we moved into the cloud era of software with, say, Gentact and the Fortress solution, it was a little kind of scary to wade into that and hear about this best of breed solution. And you had all these different options, and you could have a core accounting solution and then all these operational systems, and the natural instinct was to cringe and think, oh my goodness, this is going to be a nightmare to support. But it's been really refreshing that the way the modern solutions are built through the APIs, that you can have both solutions continuing to up upgrade and enhance and not break the
Mhm.
connections. And so that clients aren't stuck trying to walk them in parallel, or worry about upgrading one without upgrading the other. And it allows both sides to innovate quicker and bring new solutions to clients versus the once a year or once every 3 or 5 year, instances that we had back in the older software days.
Yeah. Oh, that's such a good point. We think a lot about how technology can really improve the functions, like the core functions of your business. And I actually want to kind of take a step back because we started getting really technical, although I'm enjoying the conversation. But um, you have, I've personally seen it, although I know that you do this with so many other customers that I've never seen before. But you provide a highly customized approach to consulting with each of your customers to where even, on the Dean Dorton website, it says that you are a virtual CIO to many. And I know I've seen you do that. How do you do that for your customers when you're not actually a part of their company and you're working with so many different groups? How do you become so close with these groups that you're capable of providing that sort of service to them?
Well, I kind of mentioned the curiosity,
Mm.
so I don't know. Some of my team think it's a little bit of a sickness some days because I'm a little too curious and a little too desire to solve problems. But that's the biggest thing is being interested in the business, being interested in the industry, and looking at the relationship more than a transactional. At Dean Dorton, we really do, across the firm, look at our client relationships as long term
Yeah.
versus we're not coming in to sell some software and move on and to the next one. We know that we've got to be there to support that business through whatever they're going through
Yeah.
for a long period of time. And many of our client relationships are 20, 30 plus years. In what we do. So that's a big part of it is coming at it from that approach that we're trying to understand the business, what's going on in the business, what's going on in that industry, and be able to look at it as we're trying to solve some problem with them, whether it
Mhm.
be technology or some industry specific problem or an accounting problem. Again, the core of Dean Dorton is an accounting firm, but we do a lot of specialty business consulting, and that approach has served us well. And how we've kind of gotten into some of these areas, and specifically the multifamily was part of that. Looking for solutions in specialty areas kind of led me to be introduced to you through our Sage Intact relationship, and from there we've been able to go on and help a number of clients in that same goal of they've got some business problems and they're looking for some solutions.
Yeah. I love that. In fact, it's something I'm working on personally is trying to, um I read a quote the other day. I don't even remember who it was by or even if I saw who it was by, but it said something along the lines of, like, the m the more you know, the more you realize that you don't know anything at all. Like, just like but that if and it because so many times, eh, what we think we know is shaped through our lens, like our perception or our experience. And so when we walk in, especially as someone who's running what we would call like a consultative sale, like in fact, we don't even talk about our sales team members as like sales executives. They're more like consultants because they come in and meet with the teams and that are potentially vetting new software, and you just have to come in with such an open mind and just ask so many questions. So I love that curiosity, and I feel like that's what builds that sort of partnership. That's where you get the trust because so many people these days think they know everything. So they come in, they're trying to teach the customer rather than like and show the customer what they should do and how they should do it rather than
Well,
asking questions.
even if you do know it or think you know it, it's going to change.
Yeah.
Like things are changing around us so fast these days that
Yeah.
you can't possibly feel like you know everything. And it's kind of funny, like as we go into different businesses, even in the same industry, and we're talking about even a specific functionality of software or technology, how differently each individual client could deploy that tool, and what
Yeah.
might work perfectly for one doesn't necessarily work for the next one because they have some business process that they believe is their competitive advantage, that it may work differently. Now sometimes you can look at the process and think maybe their process may not be right, but you can't always look at it and say the software's got the right answer to it.
Mhm.
So having options and being able to be flexible where it makes sense without getting too crazy and thinking we had to do a full custom solution, and finding that balance a lot of times is the hard part with clients is, okay, where do you draw that line of, yeah, that's different because it needs to be, or that's different because that's just the way we've always done it. And so
Yeah.
that's always part of the put the push and pull when you go through one of these consultative engagements with clients, is trying to challenge them enough, but be able to be flexible enough to bring a solution to fit something that they're really passionate about.
Yeah, yeah, I love that. And I think this actually leads really well into the multifamily conversation. So would you consider yourself an expert in multifamily yet?
Absolutely not. I learned something new on every one of our engagements that we work together on, but that's the fun of it, right?
Yeah.
That keeps it interesting, and there's a lot of different facets to each one. I mean, and each organization's structured a little bit differently in what they're doing, but, yeah, it's been interesting to learn this, specialty and get to work with some of the different, players in the market.
Yeah. How does multifamily differ? Well, let me take a step back. Were you an expert in any specific industry before, or are you still an expert in any specific industry?
I'm really one of those jack of all trades,
Yeah.
and I'm not afraid to kinda, as we talked about earlier, to learn something new. So we had some core industries that I've worked in a fair amount, healthcare, veterinary practices.
Hmm.
We had a lot in the coal industry at one time, and so I've at different points in my career kind of gone deeper in some industries than others. But multifamily is one that's kind of probably a little newer on my plate, but one that I've spent a fair amount of time in here recently.
Yeah. How does multifamily compare to other industries? What's
Um,
interesting about it?
it's complicated,
Yeah.
it's a little different depending on the organization, but it's fun to be able to help them solve some problems. And the complicating factors that we see are, yes, there's the accounting and the property management side, but those businesses also can be very complicated, and some of them are nonprofits. And
Mhm.
so when you get into nonprofit, accounting, there's a whole facet of different challenges that for profits don't have to deal with. We get some that are part of family offices, and so therefore the family may be invested in some other industries, and then we are seeing more and more of them have development or construction entities.
Yeah.
And a lot of them that we've worked in, we come in and they've got 3 plus different general ledger systems and operational systems that they're trying to keep up with and use. And if they've got a central core accounting, like corporate accounting team, that team's having to jump in and out of all these different systems. And so to bring them a
Yeah.
solution where the property team can have a best in class property management system, and we've got an accounting system tied to that that can also do the corporate accounting, that can also do nonprofit accounting, that can also do construction accounting with construction project management partners that we can leverage. It's really fun to see the faces on some of the prospects and clients when you're able to bring them a solution to solve all of those problems and simplify their life. We're in an age where we need to be able to do more with technology, not throw more people at technology. So, being able to simplify that and bring them some efficiencies is a lot of fun and kind of makes what we do worth it.
Yeah, absolutely. I know you and I have been in meetings with multifamily groups on more than one occasion where you have shown them something that is, capable of being automated or accomplished really efficiently inside of a solution like Sage Intact, and their eyes are just, like, so big because it's not something they've ever experienced before. But yeah, I mean, I think that there's something to be said for a lot of the more sophisticated accounting systems today that are capable of performing a lot of these functions in the nonprofit or construction or investment world that where especially with sophisticated real estate and multifamily companies that are vertically integrated, there's just a massive amount of value in that.
Yeah, it's been interesting that when we first started doing it, we were focused mostly just on the property aspect of it, and then the
Yeah.
more we started to kind of get to know the organizations and you get them to open up about everything they're being challenged with, and you find that you can bring some additional solutions that they didn't even realize was even going to be part of the discussion. I mean, that's
Yeah.
usually most of the time when we get into those discussions, those weren't even on the roadmap of the group. They were looking
Yeah.
for this one specific piece of functionality for property management with Fortress, and then we start talking about the overall business, and they bring up challenges that they've got in these other areas, and for them to see that, hey, we've got a solution that can tick off more than one box is a big win for them.
Mm-hmm. And the hope would be that you get to a point where you walk into these companies and you aren't able to see which side of the house, operations or accounting, has more pull or who has a bigger voice, right?
Yes.
Yeah, they both have great software. But you, going back to the technical part of the conversation that we kind of led into a little while ago, you were talking about the APIs. And w- for those of our listeners who don't really understand that, what is an API? What does that mean?
So the acronym stands for Application Programming Interface.
Okay.
And essentially, to boil that down to a non-technical person, and I kind of hate throwing that language out there, but it's becoming more and more common. So I'm
Yeah.
hoping more people kind of know about it. But it's a translator, or a way for one software to communicate to another one to do a transaction in an automated way. And so, it's basically the developer of one system publishing to the developer of another system how to talk and
Mm-hmm.
translate, or to do a transaction, so that you're not having to write a custom exchange of data between them. And so any of your robust platforms out there have an open API, meaning you can go on their website and download it, and be able to communicate in a very safe way with that other system. And that's what allows so many of these add-on solutions or third-party systems and efficiency tools to be able to work with multiple different accounting solutions, is because of the APIs have become such that it allows other developers to easily communicate, and then they need to be done in a way that's supportable. And
Mm-hmm.
again, so that, as one system upgrades, it doesn't break that API and that they've published to the world, because you may have 400 or 500 people who've written interfaces to work with that API. And if when you do an update, you don't want to have 400 or 500 people trying to figure out how to fix something that got broken. So the APIs allow that communication to come through even after one side or the other does their updates.
Yeah. Does Dean Dorton build APIs or connect into any of these solutions?
We leverage other solutions APIs. So sometimes an operational system may choose to be agnostic, and they don't want to try to figure out how to connect with other systems. So,
Mm-hmm.
the Fortress team leverage, say, Gentex API, and that team supports that solution. We have another solution in the IT space. There's a software that a lot of IT service providers use for their operational side that doesn't have accounting, and that software vendor, basically doesn't do any development to connect to those solutions. And so Dean Dorton built a connector to sit in
Mm.
between that operational system and, say, Gentact, and we support that with clients. So we leverage both of their APIs to help clients connect, so that they don't have to do it on their own.
Yeah, I can imagine that's a huge value add, especially for customers who have a vision for, I think, as you said, a more configurable solution. Maybe not necessarily, maybe they're not even trying to customize it, but they're really just looking to like leverage the opportunity to connect multiple solutions. So I think that's, I can imagine that that's really valuable to your customers, that not only can you help them identify it and see it, but then actually implement it for them.
Yeah, and a lot of times we'll do some custom ones. There may be some really random one-off solution that needs something, and we don't really see a viability for that being needed by a lot of people. So we'll help the
Mhm.
client do a custom one, or we'll help their development team. So, sometimes we've had clients who have in-house developed software that they use, and we'll help them make sure that what they're connecting to the accounting system works. And then the other area that we do a lot is helping to identify those third party solutions that may work through the API already, but knowing which one works
Mm.
better, which one solves a specific problem. And The example I usually give is AP automation,
Yeah.
accounts payable automation, and
That's a
and that's one of
pain
those
point
areas.
among so many companies.
Well, it's one of those fascinating things for me that you think accounts payable should be consistent, universally. It's the same function. I'm going to pay a vendor a bill. It doesn't seem like it should be that complicated.
Yep.
But every industry is a little different, and even the same businesses or the businesses in the same industry approach it differently.
Mhm.
And you have everything from how to get that bill or the invoice in, whether or not you're using purchase orders, and then how you want to get it paid. And there are probably 30 or 40 different vendors in that accounts payable automation space that work with a Sage Intact, and they all do something really well, and they all do something differently really bad, it seems. And so
Mhm.
understanding kind of the pros and cons of each one and aligning that to the client's specific goals and expectations is where we spend a lot of time kind of looking at things. And there's accounts payable functionality within the core Sage Intacct product,
Yeah.
but it may not check all the boxes of what one client expects. And one of the things I think we as humans fall into is we make assumptions about software. And
We make
so,
assumptions about everything, let's
well,
be clear,
that we do
but
that, but
definitely about
especially
software.
about software. I can almost watch it when we're in the middle of a demo or a conversation with a client, and somebody will ask something, and you start to answer it, and then they try to finish it in their mind based on their imagination or their understanding. And
Yeah.
like, no, you can't make that assumption because your colleague in the next business over makes a different assumption. And so the software can, a lot of times only do it one way. And the way you assume it to be may be different than the other person. So you gotta dig a little deeper sometimes and make sure that we've assumed the right things, and that the software really does or does not do it the way you think it should. And again, sometimes there's not a right or wrong answer. It's whatever the other person, believed the way it should work, and that could be different than the way you do. And that's where we find ourselves, why there's so many different options sometimes.
Yeah, yeah. In a technology consulting group, obviously, you have your hands in a lot of different areas of tech, and you're seeing the evolution of tech that's happening right now that has been pretty incredible over the last 12 months. In fact, I've even seen it when we've gone to conferences. There is this expectation, I think like a global expectation that technology should be doing infinitely more now than it was 14 months ago. How do you feel about that? And are you actually seeing it play out?
I'm starting to see some signs of it, but I've been fighting this challenge probably for the last 3 to 4 years.
Okay.
And in the accounting space, being part of an accounting firm, all of our CPAs have to have a certain amount of continuing education every
Yeah.
year. And so you go to conferences and you go to learn. And AI is a big topic, right? So
Yep.
everybody wants to talk about AI, and it's supposed to be the next big thing. And but for the longest time, the practical application of that for your typical small business really hasn't been there.
Mhm.
But all of the talking heads and all the seminars and all the things are talking about AI and how it's going to revolutionize and all these things. But you come back to your office and people are saying, "Well, how do I apply it? Where
Mhm.
am I applying AI in X, whether it be accounting or operations or preparing a tax return or doing an audit, all the things." And it's been frustrating as a technology person, especially in the small business space, of how to help people leverage AI when it's really not been brought to that level yet. We're
Yeah.
starting to see more of it. The generative tools are becoming a little more accessible. You're starting to see the large models opened up and be able to build them into software, but somebody's got to take that large language model and build it into some practical application of what we're doing on a day-to-day basis. And so, as
Mhm.
I'm sure it's probably frustrating for you as leading a software development team to say, we have to be doing AI. How are we going to apply this? And that you just don't have it. So we've been trying to dig in on what are some small practical applications, and we actually did a session at our big annual accounting and ethics update that we do each year back in November. And I had a member from our software team, the Sage practice. I had a member from our cyber security team and a member from our data and AI team. And it was focused on don't just talk about AI and how great it's going to be. Show me something that the audience can take back to their office and do today.
Mhm.
And so starting to leverage things like a Copilot integrated with your Microsoft Office platform,
Yeah.
that's a real thing that you can do to make you more productive. And the example was doing a pivot table in Excel. Most people will steer clear of them because they can't remember how to do it because they do it, maybe a couple of times a year. Excuse me. But showing how Copilot could help you apply pivot table stuff. The cyber guys was more on the negative side. So actually, the cyber criminals are leveraging AI probably a little faster than some of the small businesses are. So everything we've taught them for the last 10 years on protection starts to, come unraveled a bit because
Mhm.
AI is helping, the
Yeah.
criminals do more bad things. And then on the Sage Intacct side, they're starting to build in bits and pieces of it. And so one of the things I tell clients and people we're talking with, in order to keep up with the pace of change that's going to come with this AI, you want to make sure you're partnering with the right software vendors,
Yeah.
right? Is this a vendor who is helping you stay out ahead of those things because you can't do it on your own. Each business can't, figure out how to get this AI applied to every little thing they're doing.
Mhm.
And so, some examples of okay, the releases of Sage Intacct showing Copilot built into the application eventually is where they're headed. So you can have a conversation with it about how to do certain accounting transactions or answer accounting questions versus having to go run a report or go dig in the system and find it. The GL outlier stuff that they're doing, some of the intelligent time
Yeah.
thing. So partnering with the right resources who are going to help you is going to be a big part of it. I am starting to see a little more here recently. The pace of change is really hard to keep up with. It has been for a long time, but that's one of the things that we wrestle with clients is how to keep up with the rate of change. And I don't know, are you seeing anything different in your space? And
No, very similar. Very, very similar. And I think, what you said about taking AI and breaking it down into the small practical applications, right? I mean, we're all seeing it and doing it in smaller ways, like we're taking pieces of information or, asking ChatGPT to create uh the content for a LinkedIn post or whatever that is. But I mean, trying to break it down into like your actual day-to-day workflows is tough. Although I will say, I used ChatGPT the other day to help me figure out what I was doing wrong in a nested if formula. It was a very long nested if formula. And for the love, I was cussing at this point. I could not get the formula to work. I kept getting errors. And it was in Google Sheets too, which is just awkward to work in sometimes when you're working on formulas. It's not Excel, we'll just say that. But I took that formula, popped it into ChatGPT, and it immediately gave me back the correct formula. And it worked, which is amazing. So, I mean, yeah, getting it into and I don't use nested if formulas very often at all. So that's not helpful for me on a day-to-day basis. But finding where it could be, where those practical applications lie, I think, like you said, is so important. But then yeah, the large language models are out there, but they still have to be highly customized for whatever you're doing with it. I mean, Fortress is thinking a lot about what we're going to do with AI. And, one of the things that we're really looking into is creating like resident health scores so that you could take all the data that you have about a resident who's living in a community and give them a score so that you know how happy they are, how unhappy they are, if they're not a good resident because they're constantly like calling in about a work order that isn't real or that they're always paying their rent late or they're always just unhappy or complaining about things that aren't substantive, which of course the AI could actually learn and use. But in order to do that, I mean, you do have to the model has to be highly trained in order to do that. So, but yeah, we're thinking about it for sure.
And one of the things that I spend a lot of time telling clients when they're thinking about that, there may not be a practical application at this moment.
Hmm.
You can't wait until there is a perfect one to be thinking about it. And so our
Yeah.
data and AI team, when they work with clients on projects to go in and look at the business and say, a lot of clients will say, "Well, come in and tell us where we can apply AI." And most of the examples I see, we come out with 10 or 11 things to do, but of those 10 or 11, only one of them really might be true AI. The rest of them are data driven,
Yep.
and they're
Yep.
getting the data in a usable format so that when the AI comes to be more of something they can actually leverage, they're ready for it.
Yeah.
And that's what we find. Most clients have their data spread all over the place and maybe not in a very good format. And so even to get to the leverage in an AI tool, you can't even begin to think about until you get good data in a usable form. So I would recommend anybody to be looking at that and what are you doing with your current data to be able to be prepared for when an AI solution comes so you can feed it with the data it needs to be able to do something.
Yeah, absolutely. Are you guys working with customers on implementing data warehouses?
We are.
Yeah.
Yes.
What
Mhm.
do you have a what data warehouses are you using today?
For the most part, that team is primarily working with the Azure and the Microsoft stack.
Okay.
They have experience with some others, but if it's their preference, they like the Azure. It's a little easier for a lot of our clients to access and leverage some of the Power BI visualization tools
Mm,
and the
yep.
Power Automate tools to do things, and it aligns with tools they're already using and licensing that they're using with Microsoft. As we move more people off of on-premise servers,
Yeah.
they're generally going to an Azure or an Amazon AWS kind of platform, and so that's typically what we're leveraging.
Yeah.
But they have experience with some others.
Yeah, I think that's really helpful. We speak to a lot of groups who are very interested in consolidating their data and creating their own data warehouse for that purpose and to create their own uh, Power BI or Tableau or QuickSight or whatever that might be in order to create their secret sauce. And I think for a lot of groups it just seems still, especially in multifamily, which is just as you've learned, it's just an extremely laggard industry. So it just still seems far away and really complicated for groups. But I just wanted to share that that's something that your group is doing um, for organizations in order to bring that data forward in a usable way.
Yeah, that again is a big piece of what that team spends a lot of time doing, and
Yeah.
again trying to prepare for when we do get to the point where there are true applicable AI solutions. But the power of that information and access to it in a
Yeah.
more efficient way is helping you be a lot more efficient in managing the business.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, some of the groups that I see that are leveraging their own data warehouses and their own form of BI are the groups that are scaling really quickly. Because if you're able to dig in and understand like where you're successful and what is successful, then it's a lot easier to focus on that to exploit it.
Yeah, and your example of being able to look at a resident and scoring them, I think is a shift probably in the competitive landscape that we're in right now in multifamily and having enough
Yeah.
units for people. And you don't have to say yes to everybody who comes, which may be different than it might have been, back in the 80s or 90s where you're just trying to you're trying to get units filled. Now you want to fill them with the right people so that you're leveraging that asset the best you can. And so I think that's a little bit of a shift in what we're dealing with in practical application.
Yeah, absolutely. Especially in the affordable world where today there's just not enough supply of affordable housing. So it's highly competitive and massively, just a massive amount of demand versus a supply. So that's absolutely true. Well, Jason, you haven't been in multifamily all that long, but I'm still going to ask you the question that I ask everybody at the end. A question that I've asked everyone who's been on my podcast actually is: do you have a story in about your time in multifamily that you'd like to share?
Oh, just one.
I don't know what that's supposed to mean.
Well, there's lots of good
Love
stories,
it.
and every client opportunity, you unravel a good story. But
Yeah,
um, I don't know that I have a specific one. I think the best ones are those where we do unlock, the power of the solution to hit things that I quite frankly didn't realize was even a need, right? And
yeah,
so I go back to, especially in the affordable side, when we get in, when you first start talking about property management, multifamily, you're thinking for profit is the predominant.
yeah.
And when
Real
we
estate.
unlocked the nonprofit, when we first started working with our first nonprofit, um, multifamily group, that there was a whole list of just new opportunities that got opened up, and it was fun helping walk them through, that this one solution could help them with grant management and compliance and their nonprofit reporting that's different than their for-profit reporting.
Hmm.
And so to me, that was one of the more fun projects that we worked on, and being able to align with that team and be able to go a whole layer deeper than we had with a number of the other projects that we had worked on in the first components of it.
Yeah, absolutely. It is it that goes back to your statement earlier, like, it's so much fun to show groups like that, like, the solutions that are available to them that I think, in many cases they thought eluded them because they had to be in a certain platform because of the front of house operations. They didn't have access to those sort of solutions. So it is really fun to see that and then to go in and help them become incredibly efficient. And, I don't think that it would be, and I don't mean to sound cold, but I just don't think that it's a big deal if that means that we eliminate positions at companies. I mean, I think that that's like becoming more efficient with capital, and even human capital is the way of the future. But what's remarkable is that that's not at all what we've seen. We've come in and created efficiencies, but those people had to-do lists a year long that now they actually get to go and be proactive rather than reactive.
And that's the biggest thing we see. The negative side of AI. You hear a lot of people say, "It's going to eliminate my job." And I did a webinar with an HR consulting group a few months ago, and the sheer fact is we have fewer and fewer people to fill those jobs.
Yeah.
So the tool is not going to take the job. It is going to eliminate some jobs. It's
Hmm.
creating lots of other new ones,
Yep.
but it's giving you the opportunity to do more with less. And especially in the accounting space, we're fighting a huge decrease in people coming out of school
Accountants.
with accounting
Yep.
degrees.
It's a huge
And
problem.
and so we almost have to get the technology to help us, or we're going to be faced with, the inability to find people to do the work.
Yep.
Um, so I challenge people not to be afraid of it from that perspective. Embrace it. Figure out how to make you, more efficient using it, and deploy those human resources in other ways and other areas that are needed. So
Yeah.
I rarely see anything we do eliminate somebody's job. You
Yeah.
may, through attrition, not replace somebody, but I've rarely seen somebody lose their job because we've implemented some new technology. And more often than not, I see it help companies scale
Yeah.
at a quicker pace without having to continue to add people. But if people are willing to learn a new role or how to leverage the technology to do a different role, it's more empowering
Yeah.
uh, for them personally, I think. And so that's part of our challenge, is trying to encourage people to embrace it, not fight it, And the fact that it's changing at a record pace, something you learned, 5 years ago, you may need to relearn in a whole new way now. I mean, long gone are the days where you learn how to do your job and stay in that same role for 30 years. I mean, it's a continual learning process,
Yeah.
but it can be fun if you embrace it.
Yeah, absolutely. I don't normally do this, but I have another question now after what you were saying about accountants, because I've heard the rumors and I've maybe even seen some statistics. But it's pretty rough. And obviously that's something that you and your company have to have your finger on the pulse of. Well, what is happening with accountants? Where are we? What are the numbers? What are we looking at in the future?
Well, the universities will tell you they're graduating fewer, and so one of the other challenges we've got are the retirement side. So we're starting to lose a big group of population, and so there are fewer and fewer people graduating. So as an accounting profession, we're having to try to figure out how to recreate and attract people to come into the profession. Um, and then, society as a whole is generating fewer offspring. So it's a double edged problem for the accounting profession. So we're trying to figure out how to leverage technology, but it creates a whole nother set of challenges. And so, one of the things I talked about recently in a presentation I did, if you're at all familiar with the accounting industry, it was a very pyramid model. So you had a whole lot of
Mm,
people come in as staff, and then at the top of the pyramid, you kind of had the partner or the director,
yep.
and you had a leveraged model, and you have less need for all the staff at the bottom to come in and do the transactional things because we're automating some of that. But you have this huge wide part, so it's becoming almost like a diamond, and you have this huge part in the middle where you need more people in that mid level.
Oh, yeah.
So you got to figure out how to train people to get into that area sooner. Whereas before, it might have been a 5 to 7 year kind of progression where you came in and you were reconciling cash or doing some of the
Yeah.
more entry level things. We got to figure out how to get people up to speed quicker to fill in that middle gap to leverage the technology to do the things. You have to have an understanding, like you still got to understand what the technology is doing. So you got to understand the principles and the foundation. But we've got to figure out how to get them on the job training quicker, while attracting them to a profession that is struggled to want people to come in. And long gone are the days where you can come in and expect people to come and work 80, 90 hours a week during tax season. They don't want to do that. So
Yep.
we've got to figure out,
Yep.
how we trim off some of the edges of the less ideal parts of the profession, and bring people in and where they want to be here and do things. And so technology is going to be a huge piece of that.
Yeah.
There's a whole list of challenges that come along with that as well.
Yeah. Oh, it's really interesting because I know that from uh from a, just from the real estate perspective, it is a challenge to find a good accountants and accountants who have experience in real estate, um, and just even enough accountants to fill because real estate is I mean, it's a highly financial industry. And so I know that's been a huge struggle. And this leads really well into my last question, which is a new one for us this year, but really wanting to lean into sharing more with our readers about what our guests are listening to or reading. And so I was wondering if you had a book recommendation you'd want to share with us or more than one.
Yeah, so I generally don't read for pleasure. So my wife says when I do read, it's these boring workbooks.
But now hold on. Do you enjoy reading them or no?
Some of them I do. If you find the right one, they're
Okay.
fun to read. But my wife just loves to read. So like
Yeah.
every night she has to read before she goes to bed, and
Yeah.
it's fiction and that kind of stuff. So when she sees me reading, she just thinks it's boring stuff. It's work related.
Well, for what it's worth, I very rarely read fiction. Maybe like 3 or 4 books a year, but I read probably like 30 or 40 books a year. So, but I enjoy all the business or boring maybe reading that I do. I
So
love it.
I've got a three-part theme of things I'm wrestling with, and
Okay.
along with the leadership of Dean Dorton, because
Okay.
again, we're in a changing industry.
Yeah.
And so change is a big one. And so
Yeah.
there's a book called Ricochet, What to Do When Change Happens to You,
All right.
and how you respond to that change. Because, you know, that is the single biggest thing
Love that.
any any company I work with is wrestling with,
Yeah.
because the world is changing around us, our professions are changing, technology's changing. It's a lot, and humans don't like to change. It's a fact. And so that's a good one. And then leadership through this change is the next phase of what I'm wrestling with. And so I've recently just finished. It's a two-part or two-book series called Extreme Ownership:
Oh, yeah.
The Dichotomy of Leadership, by Jocko Willink. And again, trying to just understand the and push the why when you are making changes, right? What's the why so people buy into it? And then the one I haven't started yet is the workforce and generational challenges. And because that's the other piece that we're wrestling with is this change, leading people through change, and then the fact that we've got at Dean Dorton, I just saw the stats. We have five generations of people
It's
in the
crazy.
organization today, and everything we do has got to figure out how to motivate, attract, and retain people who all could have slightly different drivers and what they're looking for in a career or in an employer.
Hmm.
And so I've had a couple of books recommended. I'm not ready to one of these yet, but Sticking Points and Gentelligence are the two that I've had recommended. So I'll probably be picking one of those up here in the next week or so. But
Uh,
those to me are all going together to kind of drive what we're dealing with, but what I see a lot of businesses dealing with.
Oh, I love that. Extreme Ownership is one of my favorite books, and I don't for anyone out there who likes to listen to Audible, Jocko narrates it, and he has a very interesting voice. So it's a very interesting read. Listen, so I highly recommend it. Um, and then of course, having been in the military, I know and understand a lot of his philosophies and how the army, how the military deploys them, and I just think it's so interesting. It's really fascinating,
I
especially
like the way they structured that book, in
yeah,
that you get a story about the
yep,
war,
yep.
you get an understanding of the concept of how that story translates to the concept, and then a practical application of that concept in business. So it's not just the military trying to convince a business person about something, they've got a real life example. And so for me, it made that a really interesting read.
Yeah.
To have kind of that at each in each chapter.
Yeah, I agree. And Jocko tells a few stories where he screwed up pretty badly too, which is really, really interesting. He's a pretty humble guy throughout the book. So, yes, I'm a huge fan. I haven't read Ricochet or Sticking Points or Gentelligence, but Ricochet is about to be on my list. But there is a book that I have read about, and it's not necessarily about workforce and generational challenges specifically, but you made me think of it when you said that there's the struggle of how to like motivate to the point of retaining um and of course like motivating and keeping people and attracting people. And so there's a book called Drive by Daniel Pink that I am a huge fan of. And it's a very interesting book. I would say it's a little it can create a little conflict, especially, with different groups of people, but mainly because it it tries to stress and it's actually a very data-driven book, which I love, but it also has a lot of really great stories in it. But it really tries to impart upon us that most humans aren't motivated by money. That's actually not a primary motivating factor, and they've proven this through a ton of studies, and so there's a lot of studies and data in the book, that it talks about what actually does motivate people and that it can be a very intrinsic answer based on your past. So, and of course, some of that can be tied to generations because some generations tend to have similarly binding components of their generation that lead them to feel a certain way. But it's also can be very individual, and so there are even some theories in Drive that talk about attempting to customize comp plans per person. So whether you're giving someone, things like even like this person may only work 4 days a week versus this person maybe given more ownership in the company and less salary. Like there's just a lot that you can think about. Anyway, I think it's a really good read.
I'll check it out. Like I
Yeah.
said, it's one of the things we're wrestling with of, trying to attract and retain people
Yeah.
in a competitive environment, and try to manage all that we're going. And our HR team told me last week there's a sixth generation coming that will probably be here before I retire, and it's just like I don't know that I can take one more, but it's the reality of what we have to do as leaders is understand it and
Yeah.
understand what motivates and drives people.
Yeah. Yeah,
I'm
absolutely.
very curious about that right now for that reason.
Well, when you figure it all out, you can come back on the podcast and share it with our listeners. So
I'm not sure we'll ever figure it all out, but hopefully we can learn from each other.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for being here today, Jason. I really appreciate you taking the time. I know how busy you are, and it was a great conversation. I think a really great range and just new thought leadership for our listeners to hear. So I really appreciate it.
I appreciate the opportunity and enjoy working with you and your team and working in the multifamily space.
Yeah, same. Thanks, Jason.